Hi, everyone. Welcome. We will give folks a couple seconds to log on. Awesome. Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to today's ILNet webinar, the role of individual advocacy for SILs and SILCs. My name is Mary Kate Wells. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the program director at the National Council on Independent Living, or NCIL. For a visual description of myself, I am a white female with short reddish hair, wearing over-the-ear headphones, and I will be moderating today's webinar. Just a few accessibility considerations today. Captions are available for this webinar. To click Show Captions in your Zoom menu bar to turn them on. We also have captioning running on an external link. The link will be put in the chat, and you can click that to adjust size of the font, color, contrast, and other features. ASL interpreters are present today and should always be visible. If they are not visible, please, or you're having trouble seeing them, please let us know, and we will help troubleshoot with you. We also have Spanish interpreters available today. In order to access that, you can go to the Zoom bar on your screen and choose the language you'd like to hear the presentation in. Public chat is turned off today, but you can chat with the panelist and the host. We ask that you reserve the chat for questions about technical support only. You can use the Q&A box to submit questions for presenters. To submit questions at the bottom of your screen, you can click the Q&A box. We will be answering questions at the end of the webinar. And there's a number of ways you can engage with the Q&A. You can either enter your question in the box, or you can also email them to me if that's more accessible. My email is mary-kate@ncil.org. All right, next slide, please. Today's presentation is brought to you by the Administration for Community Living at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in conjunction with the ILNet. Next slide. The ILNet Training and Technical Assistance Center is operated by IRLU in collaboration with NCIL, April, and the University of Montana. And on the screen is the logos of the 4 organizations. Next slide. The ILNet Training and Technical Assistance Center provides training and technical assistance to centers for independent living, statewide independent living councils, and designated state entities. NCIL is a partner of the ILNet Center, and we support the coordination of these webinars. Next slide. Today, we hope that you will learn and take away the following objectives. First is training strategies for independent living staff and consumers on individual advocacy, examples of consumer engagement in individual advocacy, and how individual advocacy can lead to systemic change. Next slide. As always, we hope that at the end of the webinar that you please fill out our evaluation form. The link will be going in the chat, and there's also a QR code. We appreciate any time that you can give us to do that. Awesome. Next slide. All right, so getting into it, today's topic is the role of individual advocacy in centers for independent living. And we have 3 awesome presenters today to offer 3 different perspectives. First, we're going to hear from Tami Hoar, the Executive Director of Summit Independent Living Center in Montana. And she's going to talk about the role of individual advocacy from the center perspective. We then are going to hear from Mark Dixon, an advocate from Virginia, to hear from the consumer and self-advocate perspective. And then lastly, we'll hear from Sarah Goldman, the Director of Administration and Youth Initiatives with the Florida Independent Living Council. And Sarah will talk about how individual advocacy has led into systems advocacy in her experience. So without further ado, I am going to invite Tami onto the screen and kick us off with the first speaker. Go ahead, Tami.
Hi, I'm glad to be here today. I'm Tami Hoar, Executive Director at Summit Independent Living in Missoula, Montana. We are one of 4 centers for independent living here in Montana. And today, I would like to introduce myself using the pronouns she, her, and I am a middle-aged white woman. And as a person with a non-apparent disability, I'm often overlooked as having the lived experiences as a person with a disability. But for most of my adult life, I've spent time in emergency rooms, doctor's offices, going through lots of prescription drug trials, different things, trying to find the right combination of things that would work for me. I've missed lots of family events, community events, had to miss out on a lot of work, left half carts of groceries in the store, you know, different things like that. So I do have that experience of, you know, those challenges and those barriers. I've spent since the early 2000s in independent living here in Montana, several of those years as an executive director at another center for independent living. And then I stepped away for a few years and went to work at one of the largest corporations here in Montana, got some experience as an HR administrator, getting a lot of experience in employment law, working very closely with a legal team. And then after a couple of years, just really missed independent living and working within the disability community. And so I found myself back here as a director at Summit Independent Living, and really can't be happier. So excited to be here. And so go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So I'm here today to talk to you about where does individual advocacy start? And so it is a core service, but where does it actually begin? So it starts with everyday conversations, every day, in every conversation, in every communication that we do. And it's really part of all of our conversations. And in my communications with staff, in everything that we do, we talk about individual advocacy. It's why we're here. It's the consumers, and we are consumer directed. Our IL philosophy is nothing about us without us. It's fundamental to why we exist, who we are, where we come from. It's how we ensure that our mission and values align with this philosophy by having these ongoing discussions about the services that we provide and how they're accomplished. So how do we do that? It's a part of every day. It's a part of who we are, and the conversations that we're having in the hallways is part of the communications that I send throughout all of the emails that I send. It's part of our staff meetings. It's the core of what we do. So it really begins in every day. It's embedded in everything that we do. Next slide, please. So it really does begin with our new staff. So when we're hiring a new staff person, the most important part of hiring is in the orientation process. And it's more than just getting through the paperwork when you hire someone new. You don't just hand off the paperwork and have them fill out their W-4s and their I-9s and those things and call it good, and then send them off on their way. So it's a planned process that includes self-paced training. We use ILRU. There's such great self-paced training there. Some of the videos there, while they might be older videos, they are still so great. They really capture the movement, what it was like for Ed Roberts and all of the June Hewitt, all of those fantastic initiators of the IL movement. Those videos are our history and where our disability roots came from. So it's so important for new staff to get that and to understand where we come from. And those self-paced trainings through ILRU really give new staff that important background into where they're going to go. So we do a lot of that groundwork. We also give new hires time to acclimate to where they are, understanding our policies and procedures, and really understanding what does it mean? Where are you as a Center for Independent Living, really undertaking and understanding the philosophies of who we are and what does it mean to be consumer directed. So we do all of that before we send someone into meeting with a consumer. We often also pair up new hires and do a lot of shadow work with current staff and sitting in with those staff while they're meeting with new consumers. I'm sitting in on phone calls, really to understand how you do intake paperwork with consumers, how you ask questions, how you let the consumer drive the conversation. A lot of that is all done before we just send a new staff person out into the wild and have them start doing the work on their own. And then there's a lot of follow-up and mentoring with those more seasoned staff, and really ensuring that they're really understanding how to move through these processes with the consumers, and making sure that it's staying focused on the consumer, that the consumer is the one driving the services and driving where their goals are going and where these services are going. Next slide, please. So individual advocacy at Summit. So through a variety of IL classes, Summit Independent Living offers the opportunity for individual consumers to gain new or improved life skills, such as self or individual advocacy and or exploration of their goals. So what does that actually mean? So when someone comes here, or they've been referred to us, or they come to us on their own, they have an appointment with an IL staff person, and they're really just sitting down and being able to tell their story and talk about what's happening in their life. Sometimes people come to us and they just really kind of don't know what they're asking for. They just know they need some help, or someone told them to call us and go see Summit. And so through the conversations of letting them tell their story, a lot of things start to come to light, that maybe they need help with budgeting, or they need some help. Maybe the living situation that they're in isn't where they really need to be or where they want to be. So sometimes it's a whole host of things. And then with talking through it with the IL staff person, they can start to set out a priority of what's most important first, and what are some other things that they want to work on. And maybe, maybe they have goals of going to school, finding a different employment, or going into the employment. So it's really being able to sit down and just really talk through things and really decide for themselves what their goals are, and then being able to set that individual plan and how are they going to meet those goals. So then setting up objectives and what are each of those objectives going to do to meet that goal that they've set for themselves. And again, it's not the staff person directing that conversation. It's through the consumer telling their story of what they want and where they want to go. And this brings me to a quote that I like. My favorite author, Brene Brown, she's a research psychologist, but she does podcasting, and she does some other TED Talks and different things, but she has some really good insights. And she has this quote that I like. She says, when we have the courage to walk into our story and own it, we get to write the ending. And that again is by Brene Brown. And that's really what I see that our IL staff do with consumers that come in, is they really help people identify for themselves what their story is and where do they want to go with it. It's not the staff. It's not our staff who get to say what the ending is or where the path is that the consumers are going to go, but they're there to help them decide where they want to go and help them write their story. So it's about that individual advocacy, building up their self-esteem, their self-determination. What do they want to do? What is their goal? And how do we help them get there? It's not the staff saying, this is what you should do. This is what I think you should do. It's all about the staff, or all about the consumer and where do they want to go? And we help them get there. We help them outline the goals, help them outline their objectives on how to get there. But it's really all about the consumer. And if they choose to go that way, great. And we will help them get there. Next slide, please. So individual advocacy at Summit, again, it looks like staff offer individual consumer meetings to provide the guidance. And sometimes it's helping through get some complicated processes. So filling out paperwork, Medicaid paperwork, Social Security paperwork, that's daunting for anybody. And it doesn't matter your education level or anything like that. If you're in a stressful situation, those kind of things are unimaginable to try to get through. To just even look at it and just to start on those processes is unbearable, and it's hard to start. So a lot of times what our staff do is just sit down with individuals and just start the process. Just take a look at the paperwork, help with starting to answer the questions, and helping the individuals see that it's just answering a couple questions, maybe only going through the first couple pages in the first visit, and then come back and finish it maybe another day. Our staff do not do for the consumers. We don't fill out the paperwork for them, and we don't act without the individual present. We don't, even with our release of information, that doesn't give us permission to do anything for the consumers. We're always doing it with the consumers. So if a phone call has to be made, we can talk with the consumer, help them build up their self-esteem and their confidence so that they can make the call themselves. We can be there with them while they make the call, to be there for their support, but we don't make the call for them. We can help mentor them and coach them on how the call is going to go, maybe give them some options of, well, they might ask this question, what's going to be your answer to that? And maybe even do some role playing with them so that they can have that built up in them, and maybe some muscle memory of, well, yeah, I practice this, so I can do this. But we don't do for the consumer. And that's an expectation that they have up front when they come in with us. We don't have any magic wands. We can't jump people to the front of the line for housing or anything like that, but we can help. We can help fill out paperwork. We can print off some applications. We can do those kind of things, but we don't do it for them. And that's really important for consumers to understand that, because sometimes they do come to us thinking that, well, we're the expert, or we were told to come to you and you're going to do it for us. And so that's an important expectation that needs to be set in the beginning. And that doesn't help anybody in the long run if we're doing those things for them, or if we're making calls for them, or if we're just filling out the paperwork and answering questions for them. That's not what we're doing. That goes against the nothing about us without us. So that's really important that we instill that in our staff from the very beginning, that that's not individual advocacy. We're not helping prepare people for any future situations if we're doing that for them. Some things that we can help consumers with, and that we do a lot of, is helping people maybe compose a letter to their landlords, or maybe victim impact statements, some things like that are really hard to come up with on your own, especially if you're stressed and you're in those situations. It's really hard to even compose your thoughts. So those are some things that our staff have helped individuals do. And again, that's support and helping people compose their thoughts and getting them down on paper. And again, we're not doing that for them. We're not putting words in their mouth. We're just helping them compose the thoughts that they already have and getting them, in an order on paper. And so those are lots of things that we can do like that with our folks. So let's go to the next slide, please. There we go. Consumer-driven service. So individual advocacy is easy to become personally vested for staff. Staff really have to be careful about not to take on the decision-making. So helping consumers identify their goals and identify those objectives, those steps on how to meet those goals. Staff have to be really careful to take that step back and to make sure they're not the ones making the decisions for the consumers, but really helping the consumer identify ways that they can meet those goals and helping them set out a plan for that. Staff are there to mentor and prepare consumers for success, not just for their current situation, but for what might come in the future. And that's what I was just talking about how we don't do for them. We don't take that ball from them and just do it for them. That sometimes might be easier because we've seen those situations, we have the experience to do that, but that's not helping them when that next situation comes up, the next time they have to call the power company, or the next time something like that happens. We're helping them build those skills so that they have it for the next time something comes to them. So follow through is not a decision for the staff. If a consumer chooses not to follow through on their goals or their plans, that's their choice. And that is, again, consumer driven. It's consumer choice if they decide to continue with the path that they've set out for themselves or not. And that really is dignity of risk. That is consumer choice. That is consumer driven. That is what we're about. It is all about that choice to do what they choose. Whether we feel it's right or not, whether we would want that for them or not, that is their choice. And that is the dignity of risk that we all have. Everybody has that right to make those choices. And that sometimes is really hard for staff to sit back and know that somebody isn't following through with the suggestion that they've made, or with some really important phone call that they need to make, or following up with some paperwork or an appeal process. But that again is the consumer choice to do that. Okay, next slide, please. So individual advocacy, how Summit Independent Living does it. So I've kind of already mentioned this. We start with setting expectations. We don't hold any kind of magic wand. Paperwork is overwhelming, and we do help guide consumers through the process, but we don't do it for them. We don't just take it from them and just fill out the answers. We do help through it, and we can be there to help answer questions, or to help clarify how something's stated, or to help them come up with the way a question might be worded. It might be confusing, so we can help them answer those kind of questions, but we don't do it for them. And one of the most important things we do is we set reasonable meeting times, and we hold consumers to that. And we hold ourselves to that. We are on time. If we set a meeting time for 2 o'clock, we're ready and we're prepared to have the consumer come in at 2 o'clock. And if we say the meeting's going to be an hour and a half, we hold it to an hour and a half. And that's it. It's very fatiguing to go through this paperwork, and very challenging when you're already stressed and you're in a situation that's adding stress to your life. You add on to that you're a person with a disability, you have other challenges, you have health conditions, and you're now in this stressful situation. We have to be very mindful of that with folks that we're working with, and help them understand too that it's okay to set this into chunks of time and to keep working through that. And it's okay to do that. So this also helps empower the consumers to let them know that we're holding to what we say we're going to do. If we say we're going to meet you at 2 o'clock and the meeting's going to be an hour and a half, we'll hold to that. And that's also, it's also good for our staff also. And I emphasize that with our staff too, that we need to take care of ourselves. We need to pay attention to our health and our well-being, and to be able to be there for the next person that comes in. And we can't do that if we're not taking care of ourselves as well. Next slide, please. So individual advocacy in action. We have a consumer who, this person has participated in several of our different services, some classes, some social activities and different things, and some individual advocacy. And so Consumer J has been meeting with an IL specialist for the last few months. Consumer J was unhappy with his vocational rehab counselor. The consumer felt his voc rehab counselor was not listening to him. And so he just didn't feel supported. And so on his own, Consumer J went to the voc rehab supervisor and expressed his dissatisfaction with his voc rehab counselor, saying the same things that he was telling us, that he just didn't feel supported, he just didn't feel listened to. He just felt like his voc rehab counselor was kind of treating him just like a number, just a case number, and just not listening to him. So he told all of these things to the voc rehab supervisor, and he ended up being reassigned to a different voc rehab counselor. And he actually told me this story himself, and he's really very happy with the new counselor that he has. And so this is a perfect example of individual advocacy in action. He did all of that on his own. He took the initiative after being through these classes, coming to these activities and things with us, that he had that initiative himself, that he felt like he could do that on his own. And now he's really happy with his new voc rehab counselor. Next slide, please. So keeping an eye on the ball. It's important to remember who should be holding the ball. It should always be the consumer. So once staff takes the ball away, the staff have ultimately taken away the consumer voice and the consumer self-determination. So the consumer should always be the one holding the ball. The efforts are always consumer driven, no matter the outcome. So again, dignity of risk, nothing about us without us. It should always be the consumer who's holding the ball, the consumer who should be directing the services, and never should it be the staff person who's holding the ball and making the choices and making the calls and doing things without the consumer or making those choices. It should always be the consumer who's holding the ball. And that's what I have. And I'll turn it back over to Mary Kate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tami. It looks like we have some great questions for the end of our discussion. I am going to invite Mark to turn his camera on. Awesome. We can see you, Mark, and I'm going to hand it off to you.
Okay. Next slide. Good afternoon. My name is Mark Dixon. I'm from Gloucester, Virginia. My pronouns are he and him, which is part of the Middle Peninsula Northern Neck region. I am an African American wheelchair user wearing eyeglasses. Today I'm going to share how self-advocacy has been a part of my entire life. I will share some of my experiences in my public school years, transition from public school to college in the community, and surviving the pandemic, and now. Next slide, please. I started advocating for myself in elementary school and continued in middle and high school. Elementary school SCA presidency, middle school extracurricular activities, high school mathematics course and ramp. Yes. Next slide. What? I didn't read that. Let's go back to the previous slide. When I was in elementary school, I told my assistant I wanted to run for Student Council Association president. I came home and we made buttons for my campaign. Then the next morning, I went to different rooms around the school building and asked people to vote for me. I won the election by 100 votes. When I was in middle school, extracurricular activities were important. I would talk with the teachers to see if I could participate in their activities, which included yearbook, newspaper, and Operation Smile. They said yes. During high school, after I finished Algebra 1, Gloucester High School did not offer a geometry class for special education students. Without my parents knowing, I went to the guidance counselor and asked if my mother, a certified mathematics teacher, could teach me geometry at home. My guidance counselor called the school board office, and the director of instruction told us that mother could teach me geometry via independent study. Then I had to sit with my mother for 4 hours a day during the summer for my junior year of high school, 5 days a week, all summer long. I earned a good grade. As I was about to graduate from Gloucester High School, the stadium was not accessible so that I could get on stage and get my diploma. I wrote the superintendent of schools a memorandum specifying that I needed a ramp to allow equal access to the stage. The assistant principal in charge of graduation made sure the ramp was built and was available for the use at the stadium. The night of the graduation ceremony, it was raining, so that everybody used the ramp to safely get their diplomas. Next slide. As I was transitioning from high school, there was a lack of information given as to available programs for people with disabilities. Maureen Holloway with the Independent Center in Norfolk, Virginia, suggested I apply for the Virginia Developmental Disabilities waivers so that I can receive care and support supports in the community. This is my first contact with Centers for Independent Living. First, I studied at Rappahannock Community College. First, I studied at Rappahannock Community College for my microcomputer application study certificate, and then at Patrick Henry Community College for my associate's degree. The Virginia Community College system was so accommodative to students with disabilities. For example, when I was taking personal computer troubleshooting at Patrick Henry Community College, the instructor worked with the disability counselor to allow me to do presentation, PowerPoint presentation demonstrating on how to do this through the labs. Next slide. The 3 years after I graduated from high school, the CIL uh, the local CILs started an outreach program in an underserved region of Virginia called the Middle Peninsula Outreach Program. I learned about poverty and achieving a better life experience at the able account. Then Linda Gurley from Insane Enterprise Financial Center for Independent Living in Virginia suggested that I go to their Middle Peninsula Outreach Program for independent living skills training. The topics included nutrition, finance, emergency management, and recreation. The Middle Peninsula Outreach Program has benefited me because I got medical and financial powers of attorney through our state. Through our state protection and advocacy agency. I got the opportunity to meet with the parent of a special needs child at valuable account. And she gave me some advice on where to get the able account that did not charge a maintenance fee. I received a scholarship from Inside Enterprise, Peninsula Center for Independent Living. A years later, I was asked to serve on their Consumer and Community Advisory Committee regarding the Middle Peninsula. I now serve as the committee secretary. Next slide. I attended virtual independent living skills trainings through the Independent Center in Norfolk, Virginia. And I participated in the virtual training programs from State Enterprise Center for Independent Living in Hampton, Virginia. I learned about how to be involved in a state voting coalition for people with disabilities during the height of the pandemic. The Independent Center in Norfolk, Virginia offer virtual independent living skills training on Zoom. I was attended to attend the sessions. I was allowed to attend the sessions even though I did not live in their service area. I learned about various topics related to independent living. In one of the Independent Center in Norfolk, Virginia's newsletters, Robert Virginia was advertising in a flyer about their National Disability Voter Registration Week kickoff event. And I attended the event a couple of days later. Following the event, I got an email from the co-chair of Robert Virginia, Susan Lady, and she said she was interested in helping in building a coalition. I told her that I was interested in joining Robert Virginia. I'm a strong believer in our right to vote. REVA means register, educate, vote, and use your power. In 2022, I received Inside Enterprise Center for Independent Living's William Holloway Participant of the Year Award. Next slide. The Arc of Virginia, formed the Self Advocacy Alliance, an alliance of self advocates in the state of Virginia 2021. I first started as an advocate of the LA Alliance, and then taught us how to adjust lighting and use prompts, how to mobilize communication, how to make fires. Then a couple of years later, the ARC asked me to serve on their board of directors, and I accepted the middle as a representative on the Virginia Board of Directors. Next slide. The pandemic could have been very depressing. I'm thankful for the many boards, committees, and focus groups, webinars, coalitions, etc., which have been able to participate virtually. Virtual participation allowed me to connect with people with disabilities all over the country and the world. Lots of my communication with many organizations came about because of the sharing of information from the Independent Center in Norfolk, Virginia, and Senator Practice Financial Center for Independent Living, and at the Virginia and the Arc of Virginia. Remember, when you were advocating for yourself, you were often advocating for others. But now I would like to talk, because my father has served as a role model for me, because he had been advocating for me all my life. Thank you. Next slide. Next person.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. And you've said it a couple times when we've talked, but I love when you're saying when you advocate for yourself, you're often advocating for others. I feel like that I love that. So thank you. We have lots of questions going in the chat. Please continue to add questions for our speakers in the Q&A box. And now I'm going to invite Sarah Goldman to share about individual advocacy and leading to systems advocacy. So thank you, Mark, and handing it over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Mary Kate. My name is Sarah Goldman. I am our Director of Administration and Youth Initiatives at the Florida Independent Living Council. My pronouns are she and her. I am a young white woman with medium brownish hair. I am wearing a white shirt and I'm sitting in my office. In my wheelchair, I have a physical disability called cerebral palsy, and I just want to share a little bit of my story, how that led to my journey to individual advocacy, and then also how that's led to systemic advocacy and my role working with youth here at the Florida Independent Living Council. Next slide. I grew up in Connecticut. As I mentioned, I have cerebral palsy. So growing up, my parents were amazing. I had the most wonderful family support. My parents always taught me to believe that just because I was disabled didn't mean that I couldn't do other things with peers my age. I was mainstreamed in school, but even though I was mainstreamed, I knew that because I had a physical disability that my experience was different than my non-disabled peers. So for example, my after-school activities 2 to 3 days a week looked like going to physical and occupational therapy, while my non-disabled peers got to go to soccer practice or dance class, and those were all things that I never really had the chance to fully be a part of when I was younger. Also, having cerebral palsy, my muscles are very stiff, and due to the mobility aids that I use, navigating the snow and the cold weather makes my muscles very stiff, makes it very hard to use a mobility device when there's ice and there's snow. So when I was 13, we moved to Florida so that I could have better accessibility and also better mobility to be in the warmer climate year-round. Next slide. When I moved to Florida, I got involved with Paralympic sports, and so that allowed me to try different adaptive sports for the first time in my life, such as swimming, wheelchair basketball, wheelchair tennis, track and field. And it was also there that I learned about a program called the Florida Youth Leadership Forum. And the Florida Youth Leadership Forum is, and I'm going to refer to it as YLF. So if you hear me say YLF, that is the Florida Youth Leadership Forum. YLF is actually a national program. It's in 30 states, and it's a leadership training for students with disabilities currently in-housed here at the Florida Independent Living Council. And the delegates that are participants engage in a series of leadership training, mentoring, and activities to build social and communication skills. And YLF participants learn the history of disability rights movement and also develop the skills needed for independent living. I was 15 years old when I applied to go to the Florida Youth Leadership Forum, and it was my first time away from home. Having a disability, my mom was my caregiver full-time growing up, and she was the person who helped me get dressed, who showered me, and helped me with all those other activities of daily living. So for me to go away from home for 5 days for the first time seemed like a daunting task. But through YLF, they provided all the accommodations that I needed to be able to have this experience. So they had caregivers on site. And it was really the first time that I learned that I could have a life after school ended, kind of like Mark was just talking about previously. Before I attended YLF, I believed that I would be 80 years old living with my mom and dad. I didn't think that there was resources or opportunities for me to go away to college or to be able to work independently and live in my own apartment. And through the Youth Leadership Forum, I was able to find that there were resources and that there were people that genuinely wanted to help me move on to the next phase of transition. Next slide. Oh, can we go back one slide, please? Thank you. So I think the most meaningful part of the Youth Leadership Forum is that all of our delegates who are first-time participants, they are assigned to small groups that are led by peer support leads. And those peer support leads are actually alumni of the program that have worked or who have gone through the Youth Leadership Forum themselves. So they get to provide that peer support and that peer mentoring aspect to our first-time delegates. And these small groups are where the transformation happens. It allows for deeper discussions about what they're learning. and also provides meaningful friendships. I met some of my closest friends. I attended YLF in 2007. It is 2024, and I still have a whole network of friends that I met at the Youth Leadership Forum that are still in my close circle to this day. One of our council members here, Whitney Doyle, she is still a friend that I am in touch with, and I actually was a bridesmaid in her wedding a few years ago. So it shows that when you find peers that understand the lived life experience of disability, how much that helps individuals feel connected and also embrace their disability. Next slide. So you might be wondering what my YLF experience had to do with the impact on my individual advocacy journey. As I mentioned earlier, I did not believe that I was going to be able to go away from home or to be able to attend college, but I was able to. I graduated from high school and attended the University of Central Florida in Orlando for my undergraduate degree, and Florida State University for my graduate program, both in social work. And with those opportunities that I used to learn how to advocate for myself from going to YLF, I was actually appointed by the governor here in Florida to be the first youth that was ever on the Governor's Commission on Jobs for Floridians with Disabilities. And so as a youth, I was able to give voice to issues impacting youth as they were transitioning out of school and into employment, and what those gaps were and how we could better advocate for those things here in Florida. After I graduated from Florida State University, I got employed with the Florida legislature, where I worked as a legislative aide for 4 years. I was able to help so many constituents across the state of Florida and study a wide range of policy issues, but it was also a great way for me to now know what the issues were with transition for individuals with disabilities and be able to help give voice to those policy issues. Next slide. As I transitioned into employment, there were more barriers that I had to face as a person with a disability, and I am going to explain the graphic that is on the screen. I call it my vicious cycle of motivation, and this is what happens when an individual tries to gain employment. So we're going to go to the next slide so I can explain the graphic. The diagram, we'll go back on the previous slide in a second, but it is a circular diagram that reflects what happens, the vicious cycle that often happens when an individual with a disability begins working. It's a circular flow that has 7 text boxes and moves in a counterclockwise way. The first box is supplemental security income, so SSI or Social Security qualification. That leads to box 2, which is how you often get Medicaid qualification. Box 3 is now that you have Medicaid, you can secure your needed care. For me, it was personal care assistance, but that also can look like other things like IRWIs, which are employment or impaired related work experiences. That moves to box 4, where once you have your supports through Medicaid to live independently, you can actually gain employment. But box 5, you earn too much money and from the income that you're getting from your employment, which then leads to box 6, you lose your Social Security and in turn your Medicaid eligibility and your needed care and supports, which leads back to the top of box 7, you have to give up your employment. So you can go back to the previous slide so folks can view the graphic. So this is what happened to me. I applied for a full-time job in the legislature after I graduated from school and learned that if I made a certain amount of income, I was going to lose all of the benefits of Medicaid and personal care assistance that I needed to continue living independently. I had case managers that told me that getting my master's degree was a waste of time, that it would be better for me to work part-time because I would be at risk of losing my benefits. And I just knew as an individual advocate that that was not the answer, that that was not the end of the story. And so I did a lot of research and I found that 46 states had programs that allowed individuals with disabilities to keep their Medicaid while working. And unfortunately, Florida was not one of those 46 states. And so through my work in the legislature, I was able to help begin a process to get this done in Florida. I remember telling my former boss at the time that if I worked for her in the legislature, that I'd have to keep my income under a certain amount of money. And I will never forget that I thought she was going to fall out of her chair of disbelief. But she said, if we work together, I want to help you fix this. Next slide, please. We can go forward one more. Perfect. Thank you. It took us about 3 years, but with the help of other grassroots advocacy groups here in Florida and other individual advocates, we were able to pass the Working People with Disabilities program in the Florida legislature back in 2018. And so this allows individuals with disabilities who are on a Medicaid waiver here in Florida to earn 550% of the federal poverty limit, which is one of the highest in the country. We actually modeled after Colorado here in Florida. Also allows individuals to save up to $15,000 in assets, so they're not penalized by the $2,000 asset limit, and also allows individuals to have a retirement account without considering that an asset. It was through this that I realized through systemic advocacy that I wanted to ensure that the generations after me, the youth after me, did not have to navigate all of these barriers that I had to go through throughout my transition journey. Next slide. So here we are, full circle. We started with the Florida Youth Leadership Forum at age 15, and now my job at the Florida Independent Living Council is exactly that. I get to help oversee our state plan, which I'll talk about in a minute, for youth. And as part of my role, I get to be our Florida Youth Leadership Forum director. And so I started in Tallahassee as a 15-year-old for the first time away from home. And now here I am as a young 32-year-old living in Tallahassee, helping youth and showing them that independence is possible, that advocacy and finding your voice is possible. My role as YLF director provides the opportunity, again, to support and elevate the new participants and delegates with their individual advocacy journeys. And I even get to tie in my experience with the legislature, because every year we take our Youth Leadership Forum participants to the state capitol for a day where they get to sit in the Florida House chamber in representative chairs and practice what a mock legislative session looks like. So they get to speak about issues that are important to them and get to vote and debate on each other's bills. Next slide. So how does YLF relate to independent living? Throughout YLF, we focus a lot of our workshops on individual self-advocacy and also the independent living philosophy. We also do our personal leadership plans, which empower participants to make their own choices and set their own goals. This is huge. We have participants that come to the Youth Leadership Forum and they have been told by their parents what they can and cannot do. And it is until they feel empowered to be able to know, well, what do you want to do 3 months from now? What do you want to do 1 year from now or 3 years from now? What are your goals? What are your dreams? And for them to be able to use their voice to express that, our peer support leads are able to help them find ways that they can find people to help them support them in that goal. And also once they get back home, how they can achieve that goal. There are other individual advocacy opportunities and systemic. I talked about them going to the Capitol for a day. They also get to practice public speaking and introducing our speakers that come to the Youth Leadership Forum. And then my favorite, disability, identity, discovery, and pride. We also have a lot of participants, twofold. One, that come to the Youth Leadership Forum and don't know that they have a disability. Their parents maybe have never told them due to fear of what they might think if they have a disability or what that might mean to the family if they find out they have a disability. And so they think that they're there to help others with disabilities. But once they discover that they too have a disability, it clicks, light bulb moment for them. The second fold is the people that come that have been bullied in school, that have had rough experiences trying to make other friends, and really providing that community for them to know that they're in a safe place where they can fully express themselves and be accepted for who they are as a person with a disability, is something that I just love getting to see every year. Next slide. You might be wondering what happens after an individual leaves YLF. I know for me, I did not have a lot of resources. And this is why in this day and age, this generation has so many great ways to get involved. So I'm going to talk about two specific ways. The first is the Association of Programs for Rural Independent Living, also known as APRIL. Many of you on this call hopefully are familiar with APRIL. They provide something called the Youth Steering Committee. And so this allows youth to plan an entire conference for the April conference each fall. And they do everything grassroots. They plan the speakers, they plan all the scheduling, the panels, and it's youth empowered. Again, getting them to use their voice to be able to get back on what's important to them. And we've had several youth from Florida actually join the Youth Steering Committee and be able to be on the executive committee to help plan that conference. It's also, they provide the Lead On Collaborative, and this again is just continued self-advocacy and systemic advocacy training to youth with disabilities to help them become better advocates in their community. Next slide. The second that is more specific to Florida and our State Independent Living Council is our youth committee. Our youth committee is comprised of youth consumers from our Centers for Independent Living. It also consists of individuals that have graduated from the Youth Leadership Forum, so they're alumni. And then we also have 2 youth coordinators that work at our Centers for Independent Living who are able to help give voice to some of the issues that they're seeing with their consumers and what's important to youth at their centers as well. And so the youth committee members get to practice their individual advocacy by participating on a board. They learn Robert's Rules of Order, and to be able to watch a young person with a disability make a motion to speak up and say, I support that, or I would like to amend your motion. Watching them be able to advocate and speak up is a great tool for them as they move forward into adulthood. Another way is that they get to exercise their individual voice to contribute to our state plan for independent living. This is also called a SIL. And so our youth committee just recently actually finished writing our next 3-year state plan for youth. So they come up with the goals, the objectives, and the activities, and get to have input and use their voices to help write that SIL. Next slide. One of the things that we utilized as a youth committee when we were writing our next state plan or our SIL was a youth-specific public forum. We are required to host public forums as part of writing our state plan for independent living. And so the youth committee said, well, why don't we do one just for youth? We would love to see what issues are important to youth. And so Florida held its first ever youth public forum last year. We collaborated with one of our Centers for Independent Living and their youth transition program. And when I tell you that even as a 32-year-old, I did not know what was happening on that youth public forum because of their lingo and the ways that the youth committee was just able to engage with younger individuals and younger consumers with disabilities. I had to just sit back and watch because it was so amazing to see that peer-to-peer support and empowering other youth with disabilities through their peers to say, hey, I want to hear what's important to you. I want to hear your voice. What do you think is important? And so giving a youth a chance to participate in that public forum allowed them to use their individual advocacy skills to affect systems change. Next slide. Other ways that our State Independent Living Council provides individual advocacy or our role in that. Again, we talked about public forums. I'm going to share one other public forum that has been very impactful here at the Florida Independent Living Council. We partnered with Elevance Health and Simply Healthcare last year to do a general public forum related to personal care assistance. And everybody that attended that public forum utilized a personal care assistant or had systemic barriers that they were facing around personal care. We had a 21-year-old that joined our public forum, and he was a newly acquired spinal cord injury. And he called in from his iPad on Zoom, laying in an institutional hospital bed. And he said, I'm 21 years old, but I cannot get adequate personal care assistance in my community, and I need to be in a place where I can be taken care of. Knowing that this individual had so much potential that they could and were more than capable of living in the community independently, showed us that we needed to do something about this in our state plan. Our chair, Bob Melia of our council, he also has a spinal cord injury, and he said, let's bring this to the state plan. So we created a work group under the state plan for independent living around personal care assistance. And this led to goals and objectives being written in our new state plan around the systemic barriers. But more importantly, it's a work group, again, of just individuals that utilize personal care assistance to be able to share their personal stories and to be able to share those systemic barriers to lead to that soon, hopefully, systemic change here in Florida. Next slide. To wrap up, I'm just going to cover a few more ways that we at the Florida Independent Living Council or state independent living councils have roles in individual advocacy. Independent Living Network Day at the Capitol is when all of our centers for independent living and their staff or board members or consumers come to our state capitol and share with legislators issues that are important to people with disabilities in the independent living community. We also hosted back in fall of 2022 and hopefully early next year, a Florida Independent Living Conference. And this was an opportunity for all of our centers for independent living to bring their staff and have peer support for the best ways to reach consumers, to brainstorm on the individual level, to share consumer stories and find better ways to help advocate. And like Tami was talking about, essentially empower their consumers to advocate for themselves. Next slide. So to wrap up, I just want to clarify that the Florida Independent Living Council, state independent living councils, we don't provide direct services. So you might be thinking, well, YLF is a program. It's not, it's education and training. And that is what we do here at the Florida Independent Living Council. Through our state plan, we can provide that education and training. We also do information and referrals, but we don't do it in-house. We then refer people that call us almost daily to talk about their issues with housing or their issues with transportation. And we then refer them to their local center for independent living. And in turn, that Center for Independent Living then follows up to provide individual advocacy support, to continue that self-advocacy training or individual advocacy training, and help them create their independent living plans. Next slide. And I believe that is all. I'm going to turn it over to Mary Kate for a Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. I really enjoyed you talking and how much individual advocacy and system advocacy can have a role in kind of our very intertwined, and how centers and SILCs can partner and, build young folks and others self-advocacy skills. So with that, we have a bunch of questions for our speakers. I'm going to read some of the questions and invite our speakers to respond. And then I also have some backup questions because you all have sparked some curiosity in me. So I'm going to start with this first question, and I believe it's for Tami. So I'll invite Tami to turn her camera on. It says, these first few are probably for you, Tami. The first comment from Catherine says, love that you mentioned in quotations, give staff time to acclimate. If they are not acclimating, what have you done? What have you found helpful? What strategies have you found helpful in supporting staff?
I think the best thing to do is kind of what I was talking about is the job shadowing. So having staff sit in with a more seasoned staff. So having them spend time really just shadowing them, sitting in their office while they're doing case notes. We use SIL suites. So having them sit next to them while they're entering their INRs and their case notes from their meeting with a consumer, sitting in with a consumer meeting. And maybe once that they've done that a few times, then maybe kind of co-doing that meeting the next time, maybe asking some of the intake questions while the other seasoned staff is sitting there while they're doing it. And so kind of just eventually just doing a little bit more and more and more with a consumer meeting, doing the intake meeting, then doing the follow-up meetings, and then having that seasoned staff just checking in with them as they're doing a little bit more, and just really having that mentorship there in place. I really think that's the only way you can do it is to do it yourself. You can only do so much just sitting next to someone. You really have to just start doing it yourself. And that's really the only way you can learn, but having the support of that person next to you to say, yeah, that was really great. And next time you might ask it this way, or you know, instead of just reading from the list, just putting your pen down and letting the person talk and tell their story, you know. So just having that support, I really think that's the best way.
So, and I'm sure that helps with us. This is Mary Kate, with staff with different learning styles as well. The next question, I think Tami probably can answer. Someone asked, do you have a policy to address if consumers misses a meeting due to disability related issues or outside influence, such as transportation being canceled or transportation no show?
So I wouldn't say it's a policy per se. I think it's really up to each staff person, you know, reaching back out to that consumer, or did they call themselves? And really it ultimately is up to the staff person what they have left in their schedule, you know, contacting the consumer and talking with them about when can they get them back into their schedule. What does that look like? It might not be tomorrow, it might be next week. And that's kind of what it has to be, because the staff person can't then push other people out of their schedule. But of course, life happens. We know that. So it's really up to the staff person of what their schedule looks like. And of course, we're going to work with people, you know, for that and those kind of things that come up. And definitely, you know, we know life happens. It happens to us too. So, and sometimes our staff, things happen last minute, you know, they get sick or other life happens where they have to cancel a meeting too. So it's not a policy per se. I say it's really just, it depends on the staff schedule and when they can reschedule the next meeting. So.
Awesome, thank you. There's a question Tami, I'm going to invite you to answer, but if other speakers want to chime in, but I'm curious, someone said, as an advocate, are we allowed to represent when it comes to an SSI DI hearing, meaning attending the hearing? I wonder how you handle that at Summit.
So yeah, I can answer for Summit, and we don't represent anybody. We're here to support the consumer, and we do all of that work with them to help them understand the process and to understand the appeal and to help them gather, you know, understand what paperwork and what kind of things they have to gather for documentation, but we are not representing anybody. If it comes to that, we do have, it's very limited here in our area, but we do have attorneys and people specific who we can refer people to for that. We don't represent anybody. We're here to support the consumer, and we can certainly sit with someone next to someone as kind of that confidence that we're sitting next to them. We're there for their support, but we are not there to represent them.
Awesome, thank you. The next two questions are for Sarah. So Sarah, I invite you to come on. Actually, we got a couple here for Sarah. First one is, you mentioned that YLF interns did not realize they had a disability. So how did you do outreach and get folks to know about the program?
I'm happy to answer that. I just want to circle back to follow up on what Tami was just talking about. I didn't want to interrupt.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
So in Florida, I've actually personally had to attend several Medicaid hearings. I've never done one specifically for SSI or SSDI, but we have Disability Rights Florida. That's a PNA, and every state has a some form of disability rights or PNA. I can link in the chat the link to the National Disability Rights Network. They're actually having their conference this week, but that is a great resource. It's free. legal services for people with disabilities, and at least here in Florida, they help represent consumers at those cases. But I will go back to my topic now.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that's a great resource, and I see Amber put it in the chat.
Oh, thank you, Amber. Yeah, so in terms of the Youth Leadership Forum, we do a lot of outreach to all the school districts. A lot of times we get the answer of, oh, well, my teacher just wanted me to fill out this application. We also do interviews with each individual participant where I try to gather how much they know about their disability, or if they're just kind of shoving it off. I did an interview with an individual who's coming to YLF next month, and she goes, oh, I love helping people with disabilities. Like I love helping all the other kids with disabilities at my school. And I said, well, do you know much about your disability? And so again, just getting them to realize what the point of YLF is and getting them to understand their disability identity when it's, oh, it's just something my teacher told me to fill out. We want to know where they're at and to help them in that disability identity process.
Awesome. And I know I used to work, this is Mary Kate, at a center in the youth program, and it was kind of unfortunate how many students we worked with that were in the room because their teacher was like, hey, fill out this form, right? And unfortunately, a lot of folks didn't know or identify with having a disability. So I think that takes a lot of skill on the IL youth advocate, or the person to how to navigate those conversations. So yeah, it can be pretty tricky. And then Sarah, there's another question. Does the work that your youth committee contribute, or that your youth contribute, go into the SIL, or is it separate?
It's a great question. No, it is going right into the SPIL. They actually write the goals, activities, and objectives. Of course, we have our Centers for Independent Living review it, as we need 51% of our centers to sign off on the state plan, but we keep our goals for youth very general. So again, transition is a huge topic that comes up. And so we just keep our goal very broad for youth transition in the state plan. But no, they're the ones that are writing down all the ideas that we come together and review public forum feedback. And then we take those issues to help write the goals, the objectives, and the activities.
Awesome. And before I ask the next question, this is Mary Kate. I see that Joey put our evaluation link in the chat too. So as we're kind of coming to an end with some of these Q&As, we do appreciate your time joining us, and ask that you complete the survey. But back to the question, Sarah. And I wrote this question down too, because I know you're the perfect person to answer this. So Sandra says, I would love to start something like YLF here in Delaware. Is there any support to get us started with it? And Sarah, I wonder if you could share some info on that.
This is Sarah. Yes, that is such a great question. There are resources. So as I mentioned, YLF is a national program with a national curriculum that has come out of the California model of the Youth Leadership Forum. California was the first state YLF to occur. So a lot of states follow the California model with a curriculum. There's something called the Association of Youth Leadership Forums, also known as AYLF. I can throw that in the chat, or if somebody can throw that in there, that would be great. There's a website. You're also welcome to email me. I am the vice chair of AYLF nationally. And so you're welcome to join our calls. We meet once a month. We're taking a break for the summer because we're all hosting our YLFs over the next 2 or 3 months. But there are tons of states that are just getting started, and we would be happy to get you some support and also point you in the right direction.
Yeah, and this is Mary Kate. It would I love that idea of centers kind of taking initiatives in their state to either revamp or participate in their YLF. It's a great resource, not only for youth, but for really communities and families to kind of have that awareness, and do individual advocacy. And I'm just looking at the chat. I'm gonna invite Mark, if you I'm gonna read the question and you can let me know if you wanna if you want to answer it or if you want to answer it verbally or in the chat. So Mark, do you have any advice or what's your opinion on what to do when a consumer might lack motivation or confidence to complete an IL skill? And you're on mute. So do you want to answer in the chat or?
Yeah, motivation of confidence.
Yes. Awesome. So I think, Mark, if you want to add any advice or tips there, feel free to add that to the chat. I wonder, Tami and Sarah, do you want to add anything about when a consumer might lack motivation or confidence? Tami, I'm curious if, I mean, I feel like this relates a lot with the dignity of risk. I wonder if you could share a little.
Yeah, this is Tami. I think a lot of it is just continuing to talk with the consumer. So this is building a kind of a relationship with the IL staff and the consumer, and just again, just really talking with them about what are their goals. Maybe they've set these goals and it's maybe just not something they're that interested in anymore. Maybe there's something else going on. So it's really just continuing those conversations and just visiting and letting the consumer know that this is, you know, their path and their journey. And if this doesn't meet what they want to do anymore, let's just keep exploring. Let's keep discussing. Is there something else they want to do? Maybe they want to join some of the classes that we're offering. You know, so maybe just something's changed or there's just something else going on that they just haven't, you know, felt ready to talk about yet. So maybe that's what it is. And just keeping that line of communication open without pressuring and saying, well, you said this is what you wanted to do, you know, no, you know, not taking that line with them. And again, like you just said, Mary Kate, that dignity of risk. Everyone has the right to choose. And that sometimes means also not following through with something that they said they wanted to do. So dignity of risk just means being able to make choices. And even if those choices have some consequences, you know, some negative consequences. So I would encourage just keeping the line of communication open and keeping it, you know, non-judgmental and just being able to let the consumer, you know, feel like they can be open and honest about where they want the direction to go and what path they want to go down. And if they want to try different things, and even if they said they wanted to do that, you know, some time ago, maybe that's not where they want to go now. Something maybe has changed or something else has sparked their interest. So.
Awesome. And Mark added, sent to me to this, if someone is, you know, maybe changing their mind, lack of motivation or confidence, maybe. He said, take an IL class like I did in middle school and talk to the consumer about obtaining training at the CIL. So Mark suggests, you know, talking about to a center about obtaining different skills as a self-advocate. Awesome. So we have 2 more questions in the chat before we do that. I see folks, you know, I know we're coming to the end, but I will plug one more time that we do really appreciate the time you put in the evaluations. And Joey is putting the link in the chat. And I'm just for time's sake, I wonder if we could close with this question from Sierra, and I don't know if Sarah or Tami might be able to answer this, or Mark, if you have any suggestions. So the question is, how and can I help a consumer aged 19 to 22, independent living skills and goals, or service, sorry, independent living services and goals if she is not verbally communicative? Her mom does all the talking for her. And I know this can be a challenge at centers since we are consumer directed. So I don't know if Sarah, do you want to start?
Sure, this is Sarah. I'll chime in and I'll let Tami speak specifically to what she does at her center. But just as a person with a disability, I think empowerment is so important in independent living, and allowing individuals that are young to find their voice is just so important, regardless of disability. And so I would encourage you to maybe find some assistive technology that would allow this consumer to communicate, whether that's an iPad or other communication devices. A lot of times your state vocational rehab will help pay for those if it will help lead to employment or to further their education. Some states, I know our state has an assistive technology alliance that meets and gives loans to families to help pay for some of that assistive technology, but that would be my recommendation, because I just think it's so important to help that consumer find their voice, especially at that age range. But I'm going to let Tami speak about what she does at her center.
Thanks, Sarah. And I would just absolutely ditto everything Sarah just said. And at our center, this has come up a couple of times, it doesn't real frequently, but absolutely everything Sarah just said. And we emphasize that we will not communicate to a parent or a guardian without the consumer present. The consumer must be present. And everything Sarah just said, that was everything I was going to say, is there must be some assistive technology that could, be helpful. And I would emphasize with the staff person to be very patient, and no matter how slow or how tedious it is, let the consumer do as much communication as they can, and encourage the mom or the parent. I forgot who they said it was, but let the consumer do what they can to speak for themselves, whatever assistive technology it takes, but be very patient. And no matter how long it takes, let them do as much of their own speaking as they can and communication as they can. And again, here, like Sarah just said, we have a great assistive technology program here at our university where they do loan out equipment. If the mother is, or the parent is communicating for the individual, there must be some way that they can communicate. And I would just desperately say you have to encourage that and communicate with the consumer.
Well, I think that is a great way to end our webinar today. I want to thank all of our speakers for sharing the different perspectives and having this conversation. We appreciate everyone's time, and please consider taking our evaluation. It's in the link in the chat, or it will, and Sharon, if you go next slide, there will also be a QR code. So with that, thank you everyone so much, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.